Well, I'm so glad you're joining us for part 2 of a series that we're calling Alt Kingdom, looking at some of the teachings of Jesus and the life they invite us into, which is really an alternative, like completely different than maybe what you've experienced in life, and certainly completely different than a lot of us have experienced, even in the church or as Christians. And so today, I just want to give you a heads up. We are talking about sex. So if you've got a child in the service who would be like 13 or younger, young teen, we have great environments for them. If you're 13 or older, take out your notebook, okay? Because we're going to be talking about sex. And I mean, it's a hard subject to talk about because, I don't know, do you remember when your parents had that sex talk with you? Or maybe they didn't have that sex talk with you. If you grew up, maybe you're trying to have that sex talk with your kids right now and it's super awkward. I mean, I don't think it's ever easy as a dad myself. It's like, how do you actually say what you need to say? And if you grew up in the church, maybe the sex talk went like this: don't. End of talk, right? It's just like, okay, I'm never supposed to have sex. Sex is bad. Sex is terrible. And that's the way a lot of Christians have handled it. Maybe you didn't grow up in that context. Maybe your parents, maybe your mom or your dad sat you down and said, well, as long as you kind of love each other and as long as you're there for each other and as long as it's romantic, as long as you're committed to each other for the day, it's fine, right? That's another approach to it. And so we're going to look at what Jesus has to say, but I also need to give you another heads up. This message will make everybody angry. I promise you that, okay? So if you don't leave angry today, you haven't heard the message. This message made me angry and I wrote it. So it's that kind of a message. So this is an all skate, okay? We're going to look at Jesus' radical teachings when it comes to really marriage and divorce and by inference sex. So it's an alternate view of sexuality. And this message is going to make you upset if you're single, if you're married, if you're divorced, if you're straight, if you're LGBTQ. I mean, it doesn't matter where you are. You're going to be offended by Jesus' teachings if I get this right, and you are going to be offended by this message if we do it well. And I am offended by this message, okay? So just so you know, this should shake all of us. And that's exactly what Jesus was trying to do, because the way we understand sexuality, the way I process sexuality, the way you process sexuality, whatever your context is radically different than the way God saw it. So, one thing that I think is true is sex is a bigger deal than ever in our culture. We are a long ways away from Victorian ethics. We are a long ways away from maybe even our grandparents' generation. And everything seems to be sexualized today. Even, if you're a teenager, if you're in high school, you're on social media. Even Instagram, which seems like a pretty neutral platform, has a very clear sexual dimension to it. It's like, which guy is liking my photos? Which woman likes me? All your chats, all that stuff. It's so sexualized. You can't go anywhere these days without seeing sex. I mean, when you leave here, you'll probably see a sexualized billboard ad. And stuff that would have been classified as pornography 20 years ago is just mainstream today. So you pick up a magazine, you look at the ads there, you're watching TV during the daytime, doesn't even have to be that channel, and it doesn't even have to be that movie or that stream or explicitly porn, and you're just seeing sex everywhere. And it used to be, if you wanted to access pornography, you had to go into a store and have all that shame and go to the top shelf, and maybe it was covered in cardboard or something or brown paper, and you brought it home in the whole deal, and the reality now is it's right there. Anytime you want it. So sex is a bigger deal, and porn sites, speaking of porn sites receive more regular traffic than Netflix, Wikipedia, eBay, Craigslist, Instagram, and Twitter. So you think about it, right? And a decade ago, if it came to porn, we would have been saying, guys. But the reality is now, it's everybody. That there's a meaningful percentage, depending on what you look, 30 to 50% of all porn site visits, depending on the stat you look at, are now women. So it's not just guys, it's kind of everybody. And it is a huge business. It is a huge thing. And what's happened in our culture, and this is what's so interesting about sex in our day, is that porn used to have a negative association with it. And now you end up seeing comments like this. So this is taken from an anti-porn site called Fight the New Drug, and they were just quoting different feeds and what people thought about porn. So this is from Twitter, obviously. Porn doesn't play games. Porn doesn't text back slow. Porn respects the whatever is grayed out and gives you exactly what you ask. I love you, porn. And so there's this idea that sex is just something that you have a right to, something that expresses yourself, that it is without it, you are not fulfilling your life. And so sex is just, we live in a very sexual culture. And in the church, sometimes we never talk about it, or we talk about it in the wrong way. And often one of the reasons people don't want to look at it, and maybe this is your hesitation, whether you're a Christian or whether you're just checking this out for the first time, is you're like, I think I know what the Bible's going to say, and I already don't like it. Like, I'm not sure what it's going to say, but when I've heard preachers talk about it, the little bit I've seen of Scripture, it's like, that is so 2,000 years ago. That is so my grandparents' generation. That is so what used to be. Like, can you not get with the program, and can you not understand where I'm coming from and what my needs are and what my rights are and what a realistic approach to sex actually is? Maybe it's just a biological thing. Maybe it's just something you do between two consenting adults, or it's friends with benefits, or it's like, hey, I have the right to this. But you know what? This is what you need to know about Jesus' approach to sex. That Jesus' approach to sex isn't just trying to save you from something bad. Because if you grew up in the church, it's like, well, you need to do this because bad things will happen to you otherwise. Like, if you start having sex before you're married, if you start doing this, if you do that, if you do this, bad things are going to happen. No. Jesus' approach to sex isn't just trying to save you from something bad. He's trying to introduce you to something better. And this is true if you're married, because some of you, you're in a sexless marriage. Or you're in a place where you really like the person you got married to. You thought he was great, and he's not so great anymore. Or the spark is gone. And you're struggling right now in your relationship. Or you're struggling with the fact that you're divorced. Or you're struggling with the fact that you're separated. Or you're struggling with the fact that you're single, and it is not by choice. And so you look at, because you're going to look at what Jesus has to say, and I promise you, when you see it, you're going to be like, come on, no way. Like, that's ridiculous. But I promise you, Jesus is not trying to save you from something bad. He's trying to introduce you to something better. So why don't we have a look at what Jesus has to say about sex? So we're going to continue on from where we left off last week, where Jesus drops in Matthew chapter 5, we're just going to look at a few verses, some teachings on divorce and remarriage, and indirectly on sexuality. So this is from what we popularly call the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus was on a mount, he was teaching people, and he sort of collected all of his truths and just dropped them. And if you've never read the Bible, you've heard some of these things. You know that phrase, like, go the extra mile? Comes from these teachings. You know that idea of loving your enemies? That comes from here. That comes from Jesus' teaching on the Mount. Now, this isn't as well known, but he's continuing on. So last week when we started, we looked at anger. And we looked at this crazy teaching that Jesus had that shakes us to the core. And now he changes his mind, and he doesn't change, he just continues, and he says, okay, here's what's happening. And this is where we open the text today. He said, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. So what Jesus is doing here, same thing he did last time, right? Last time we looked at it, he said, you shall not commit murder. He's actually quoting from one of the 10 commandments. If you ever heard of those, he's quoting from one of them. And they're like, oh, yeah, we know that. You're not supposed to murder. But then he flips it and he says, okay, you thought that was about not taking somebody's life. I'm going to tell you, if you said you're an idiot, if you ever thought that, if you ever thought someone's an airhead, hey, you just committed murder. And we're like, whoa, right? And that's what Jesus is doing in the Sermon on the Mount. So now he turns his mind to adultery. So what's adultery? Adultery is you're married and somebody cheated, all right? That's a pretty broad definition of adultery. But he cheated on me, all right? He committed adultery. And Jesus said, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. Straight out of the Old Testament. And they're like, yeah, we've heard it. Let me tell you what's underneath that. He says, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And all of a sudden you're like, what? Okay, yeah, I haven't woken up in someone else's bed, but I mean, this kind of owns all of us, right? Like, I'm a married guy. I've been married for 28 years. And I read that and I'm like, I'm in trouble. I've looked at women lustfully that I'm not married to. Now what? And I'm a preacher. I'm the guy. My wife's in the building. She heard the sermon in the first service. Like, I'm in big trouble. Like, we have to go to marriage counseling after this. And she's never looked at a man lustfully except for me. So I'm in big trouble. Now, it's like anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, like, okay, who hasn't? Married, single, right? And women, you're like, this guy's got a six-pack and it's on his abdomen, unlike my husband. His is in the fridge, okay? So you're like, I'm looking at him on the beach and I'm looking at what happened to you. I know what you look like in our wedding pictures and know what you look like now and I know how you treat me. So I'm looking at these guys lustfully. And Jesus says, look, you do that, you're no different than somebody who woke up in someone else's bed. And you're like, I told you you'd hate the message. And then he doesn't stop. He says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's like, what? So next week, when I show up with one eye patched over, and then 2 weeks from now, two eyes, you're going to know what happened. I won't be able to see anything. And then he goes on, it is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. So what is he talking about here? Is he talking about, okay, so Carey, you looked at her lustfully, you were on the beach, you were scrolling through Instagram, checking her out, like, you're going to hell? Like that ruins your salvation? No, that's not what Jesus is talking about. We talked about this before. You have to look at the context. So your eternity is determined by what you do with Jesus. But what he is saying, because he concludes this by saying, hey, if you listen to what I'm saying to you, you built your house on the rock, not on the sand, and there's a road that is very broad. A lot of people travel it, but there's a narrow little road, and if you find that narrow little road, it leads to life. So what he's saying is, if you want to get the most out of this life, and you want to avoid the broad road to destruction where almost every marriage goes, even if you stay married, where almost every human being goes, pay attention. So he's also teaching this in Jerusalem. And outside, there's a place called Gehenna. And all the locals 2,000 years ago knew this. And Gehenna, if you look at this in the Greek, hell, the word is Gehenna. All right, and you're like, what is Gehenna? Gehenna was a garbage dump. What do you do with your garbage 2,000 years ago? You burn it. And outside, Jesus is standing on a hill, and he's like, you know what your life is going to be like? If you're just always lusting after the person you're not with, if you're always thinking about the person that you want but you don't have because you're not with anybody, here's the reality. It's like that. It's like you might as well just throw your whole body into hell. Eternity is a separate issue, but some of you, you've had that moment because you've woken up the morning after the night before. And maybe you're like, did I actually do that? Did I actually get that drunk, that high? Did I actually wake up with this person next to me? Did I actually say what I said yesterday to that person? Like, the morning after the night before? And you wake up and there's like literally weeping and gnashing of teeth and you're like, how could I be so stupid? I didn't actually do that. And you try to go back to sleep and then you wake up again and go, oh, I did that. That's what Jesus is talking about. That you actually did that. And he's like, okay, you want your life to be like that? Keep going. We'll talk about eternity in a separate thing, but that's where you're going with this. And then he continues. He says, so gouge your eyes out. Then he says, if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. Which is a fun metaphor because we're talking about sex. And that makes me extremely uncomfortable, all right? It's like, whoa, are you telling me? Next verse, quick. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Same thing, garbage dump, just burning. And he's like, do you want your relationship to end up there? Do you want your life to end up there? Do you want your sexuality to end up there? Is that where you want to be? Because that's where this goes. But he's not done. And it's been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. Now, we'll come back to this in a minute because some of you are like, yeah, well, I was married and now I'm not. I'm divorced. So what is Jesus going to say? And it's hard. It's really hard. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery. It's like, what? So what Jesus is saying here, he says, yeah, divorce happens. And it does happen in this world. We're going to get into this because this is such a hard teaching. Fortunately for us, Jesus clarifies it later on, and Matthew records it in Matthew chapter 19. So we're going to look at that in just a moment. But he's saying, okay, so if you have sex outside of marriage, that's a legitimate grounds for divorce if your partner cheats on you. But then it's not just having sex outside of marriage. The word for sexual immorality actually is the Greek word is porneia, from which we get pornography, porn. So it's like, okay, and what does that actually mean? Well, that's a really interesting question. Nobody really knows. Jesus is going to clarify that. What it means, it's not just I had sex with this person I'm not married to. It means I went places immorally that I ought not to have. And Jesus said, well, in those cases, I understand divorce. But he says, except for that, anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And there are moments in Jesus' teaching, you can see this if you read the 4 biographies, the accounts of his life, where he drops stuff like this and people go later on, the disciples are like, okay, it's just better never to get married. This is so hard, we all give up, we all quit. And then it's recorded in John 6, Jesus gives some other teachings, and there's a big crowd, and he drops some wisdom, and they all just start walking away going, it's impossible, that's impossible, that's impossible, that's impossible. And then he turns to his disciples, and he says to his disciples, are you guys leaving too, his closest followers? And they're like, who else are we going to go to? We don't like it either, but you have the keys to life. And Jesus' teachings are just tough. And you're probably thinking, well, you don't know how bad my marriage was. You don't know how bad my marriage is. You don't know how hard it was to be single and how badly I wanted to get married. And so I just took the first person that came along and it was a mistake. And now you're saying, what? You're not supposed to get divorced? Where does this come from? So this issue doesn't go away in Jesus' life. It doesn't go away from your life and my life. So it picks up again in Matthew chapter 19. And this time, there were some religious leaders called Pharisees who came up to Jesus and who started asking him questions. So fortunately for us, we have this text because it helps us understand what Jesus was driving at. Some Pharisees came to test him and they asked him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And look at this, for any and every reason. Now, what's not clear to you and me just reading the text is that this was the issue of the day. This was headline worthy because divorce, you're not supposed to commit adultery, but divorce was allowed. So how does that work? And there were 2 schools of religious thought in Jesus' day. One, led by a guy named Rabbi Shammai, said, hey, the only reason that the priest should give a certificate of divorce is where there has been adultery, where somebody slept with someone else, okay? So if someone had an affair, you should issue a certificate of divorce, but for no other reason. But there was another school of thought led by Rabbi Hillel and some of his disciples. And Rabbi Hillel said, no. It's not just if someone had an affair. He says it's for any reason that you're not in love anymore. Maybe the spark's gone. Maybe this is actually from the literature from the the first century. Maybe she made you a bad meal. You can give her a certificate of divorce. Now, maybe you just don't like each other anymore. Maybe you're not attracted to her, right? Give her a certificate of divorce. So it was for any, and this is underneath, any and every reason. So this is a reference to Rabbi Hillel. Any and every reason. And some people are like, so we want you to adjudicate, Jesus. Is it Rabbi Shammai? No, only when you have an affair. That's when you can permit divorce. Or it's just yeah, we just don't like each other anymore. And that's kind of the question today, too. When do you stay together? When do you break up? What do you do? Are there grounds? Are there any grounds? It's hey, the spark's gone. It's over. And so they're asking Jesus, A or B? And Jesus says, neither. Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female? That at the very beginning, so he's talking about Eden. He's talking about paradise. He's talking about your life and my life before sin entered into it. He's talking about the world before sin. He says, and again, whether you believe that stuff or not, there is something inside you. There is something inside you that longs for the way it could be. There's something inside you that longs for life and a relationship and love that isn't stained and twisted and weird. Like there's something in you that longs for unconditional acceptance. And Jesus would call that Eden. So at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man should leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So leave home, and if you find somebody, something different happens. The two of you become one. That's why sex is so different. We think it's just a casual hookup. We think it's just swiping right. We think it's a biological thing, but nothing. And you just have to do a little bit of counseling with people to realize that sexual sin is forgivable, absolutely forgivable, but it is really hard to recover from. That stuff that happened, that shouldn't have happened, that you regret, that's just hard. And it's not impossible, you heal from it, but like, why is that harder? Like you can recover from bankruptcy more easily than you can recover from sexual sin. Why is that? Because it involved your soul. You thought it was physical, but it wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. That this is doing something to you. Porn is doing something to you. The casual hookups are doing something to you. The affair is doing something to you. And doing something to this oneness that was there or could be there or one day might be there, and you missed it. And he says, so when marriage happens, Jesus says, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. And you've heard this at ceremonies. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Jesus is saying, you're like, okay, what's the grounds for divorce? Like an affair or like we just don't like each other anymore? Like what's it? And Jesus says, no. This is the way it was at the beginning. And so they're like, okay, but why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? See, now the other thing that's at stake, a very patriarchal society 2,000 years ago, not that we're not, but they were even more so. And if your husband decided to divorce you, so what's at stake here? You didn't have courts or that sort of thing. You just said 3 times, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and then you were divorced. And a woman didn't have the rights and privileges she has today. So all of a sudden, she's vulnerable. All of a sudden, she's in a place where she may not be able to provide for herself, may not be able to eat. And so really, as a husband, what you're doing is you're putting your wife in a very difficult situation socially. To some extent, you still are today. I mean, when divorces happen, lots of things, there's a lot of fallout. But back then, even more so. And so they said, yeah, but Moses commanded that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce, right? And Jesus replied, no. Moses permitted you. He didn't command you. He permitted you to divorce your wives. And then he drops a reason. And this reason, I mean, wherever you are, if you're single, if you're married, you're divorced, if you're married again, if you're separated again, whatever that is, whatever situation you're in, listen up. Moses permitted you to divorce. It wasn't this way in the beginning, guys. This isn't the way God designed it, but I'm going to tell you why he did it. He did it, he permitted you, because your hearts were hard. And I've been married for 28 years, and there have been seasons in my relationship where my heart has been hard toward my wife. And then everything looks like a better alternative because you're in a funky place. And Jesus comes along and he says, Carey, you know what that is? Your heart's grown hard. If it was really open, if you were really open to her, if you were really open to me, If you really would forget about yourself for a moment and just really submit yourself to her and to me, amazing things could happen. But right now, you're not going to do that because your heart was hard. And I just want to remind you, it was not this way from the beginning. You know what? Part of you remembers that. Part of you remembers what it was like in the beginning. And it's the part of you that longs for unconditional love. It's the part of you that wishes that somebody would see, it's not that they would really accept you for who you are, because change is a good thing, but they would see you for who you really are and love you anyway. That they would see you for your mistakes and your sins and your eccentricities and go, yeah, some of this really drives me crazy, but I love you. And Jesus says, it wasn't this way from the beginning. And see, our culture has an idea of marriage. You know what marriage is in our culture? It's a contract. It's a contract. It's like I sign on the dotted line, you sign on the dotted line. Now, Carey, if you do this, then I'm out. And if you do this, my wife's name's Tony. Tony, you're out. And if you do this, then, 30 days, shotgun clause, we're finished, right? I don't like it. Spark isn't there anymore. You're not very nice. You're not the person I married, da-da-da-da-da. That's a human understanding of marriage. Now, God has a very different understanding of marriage. And you know what it is? It's not contract, it's covenant. And the two parts of the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, you can also call them Old Covenant, New Covenant. Because our God is not a contract God, he's a covenant God. And you know what he says? He says, hey, I'm in even if you're out. I love you even if your heart is hard. I'm for you even if you're not for me. I'm with you even if you abandon me. That's the gospel. And God says, okay, I want your human relationships to be like that, particularly marriage. I want you to be in when she's not in. Now, I know it takes two to tango in the whole deal, but he's saying, Carey, if you follow me, you need to be there for her even when you don't feel like it, because I am there for you on your good days and on your bad days, and that is exactly what you have been longing for your entire life. You have a memory of Eden. You've got a fingerprint of Eden inside your heart. And Jesus says, that was the beginning. That's what you almost remember. And I know, now you're caught up into my rights and her rights and how we're going to divide this and what are we going to do. I get that. And I don't like you, and if you would change, and if you... So where does this leave us? It's a great question. Well, and please hear this. Because the gospel, as hard as this is ultimately good news. See, nobody can go back in this life, but we can all move forward. Nobody can go back. You can't go back. Because some of you, you're like, yeah, that marriage fell apart and so did this one. You can't go back and undo it. Now, sometimes we see stories of redemption. We've seen stories in our church where couples got divorced and somehow Jesus got a hold of that story again in a fresh way and they got remarried. And we've seen couples split up and come back together again, and we've seen relationships healed. And that happens from time to time, and maybe that's within a possibility for you, and if so, pursue it. But some of you are like, no, that thing's dead, or maybe they're dead, You can't go back. You can't undo what you've done. You can't unsleep with the people you've slept with. So you can't go back in your life, but you can move forward. And so you need to start today. And guiding that, particularly when it comes to sexuality, because it's so easy to look at Jesus' teaching and go, completely unrealistic. Because you think your sexuality strikes at the heart of who you are. And this is probably the most countercultural thing I'm going to say all day today. Your sexuality is not the heart of who you are, and your sexuality is not your identity. And I know politically and culturally nobody believes that, but I promise you, you are bigger than your sexuality. Your sexuality doesn't define you. Your singleness doesn't define you. Your orientation doesn't define you. Your marital status doesn't define you. It doesn't. See, your situation doesn't define you. All right, so maybe you're in a mess right now. Maybe you're in a loveless, sexless, joyless marriage. That doesn't define you. Maybe you're single again, but you didn't want to be single again. That doesn't define you. Maybe you've been single forever and you're like, that doesn't define you. That's not who you are. Whether you're having sex or not having sex, that's not who you are. Your situation doesn't define you. Your status doesn't define you. When you have to fill out those government forms and it's like single, married, widow, divorced, that's not who you are. When you have to pick a gender, that's not who you are. That's not who you are. Your attraction doesn't define you. Who you're attracted to doesn't define you, and your brokenness doesn't define you. Because when you look back, some of you, your story is, every time I think sex holds out this incredible promise, but what it seems to deliver is this incredible brokenness. And if that's where you are, your brokenness is not the final word. You know what defines you? And I really believe this. Jesus defines you. Jesus is your identity. Whether you're single, whether you're married, happily or otherwise, whether you're divorced, whether you're separated, whether you're gay, whether you're straight, Jesus defines you. So as a result, starting from where you are now, here's the question. What would it mean for you to obey God so you can discover something better relationally, intimately, and sexually? Starting from where you are now, you can't undo last weekend. You can't undo 5 years ago. You can't undo all the relationships you've been through or haven't been through. You can't undo your status right now. You can't undo that. All right, that's done. But what would it mean for you to obey God, to really surrender to Jesus so that you can discover something better relationally, intimately, and sexually? And we've taught this before, but this is true wherever you are, whether you like where you are or not. But here's what's true for all of us, married, not married, and whatever relationship or non-relationship you're in. A surrendered sex life is the best sex life. You want the best sex life? A surrendered sex life. And what I mean by that is surrendered to Jesus, surrendered to God. To say, I'm attracted to someone I'm not married to or I'm not with right now. I surrender that to you. I'm attracted to people I don't want to be attracted to. Hey, I'm in a marriage that is kind of flat. I'm going to surrender it to you. I do not want to be single, but I'm single. I'm surrendering that to you. I don't want to be separated, but we're separated. I'm surrendering that to you. Because Jesus had a habit. People would come along to him and, they didn't have status before God. He had prostitutes and people in all kinds of lifestyles come up to him. And Jesus said, that doesn't define you. I'll redefine you and come on and join the kingdom of God. And he said, now you need to surrender that, but a surrendered sex life is the best sex life. And remember, because this is so hard, you're like, no. I want to have sex with whoever I want to have sex with. I'm not giving up my porn habit. I'm going to keep at least mentally straying outside the boundaries of my marriage. I'm going to continue that emotional affair with that person on work. And no, my wife's never going to see my text messages. You're not surrendering that. See, what's underneath that is you think Jesus is trying to keep you from something good. You think that you know better than Jesus and you will get far more out of this life if you don't surrender that. Jesus' approach to sex isn't just trying to save you from something bad. He's trying to introduce you to something better. So wherever you are, because you can't regain your virginity. You can't go back to like college or high school. You can't go back to that first marriage. I mean, time moves on. So here's my encouragement for you today. Make this the beginning. Make today the beginning. It's just, hey, there is a new beginning in our relationship. I've been married, blessed to be married for 28 years, but as we've shared with you before, they haven't all been easy years. And in the last few days, we were out for dinner with really, really good friends of ours that we've known for over 15 years. And they've been through the ups and downs with us and everything. And toward the end of the night, one of our friends just looked across the table and she said to my wife, Tony, and I, it's like you guys have been transformed. We're talking about it on the way home and we're like, yeah. But that didn't come because we just took, it's not like every day's perfect. Every day's not perfect. I'm not perfect. But we just had to decide that there was a different day that was going to be day one. And maybe this is day one for your new surrender. Maybe this is day one for you to stop saying, how come I'm single? How come I'm divorced? How come I'm in this horrible marriage? How come I'm so unhappy? Just dump it. And make this the beginning. Emotionally. Make it the beginning emotionally. Where you say to God, okay, I'm going to surrender this to you because I spend all my day thinking about what I'm not. But I'm just going to surrender this to you. Intimately, because intimacy is bigger than sex. I know we use them as synonyms sometimes. You want to be intimate, but sex, so intimacy is different than sex. Because sometimes sex happens with no intimacy. It's just a transaction. It's just friends with benefits, or it's porn. There's no intimacy in that. And you can have intimacy without being sexual in the most appropriate way. It's bigger than that. How about relationally? Because at the heart of your marriage at the heart of your friendship should be a relationship. And what about for those of us who are in a marriage who wish we were divorced? And you can't financially, or you haven't got the courage, or lawyers are expensive, or wherever you are. And you're just thinking, you're like, okay, I don't really like her anymore. I don't like him anymore. And you're looking at all the other people who you think would be better partners, and you've got number 2 and number 3 all lined up. You know what you should do? Take all the energy you would put toward a new girlfriend and give it to your wife. Because if you started dating someone new, if you broke up today and you started over tomorrow, you found somebody, you would start dating her and you'd send her flowers and you'd return her texts and you'd take her out for dinner and you'd romance her and you'd do all those things. Well, great. Just do that for your wife. The person you're married to. You're like, I don't want to. You did a few years ago. But you see, if you surrender and you submit to God. Well, what if I'm single? What if I'm not in a place where I want to be? Then take all the energy you would put toward a new relationship and put it in your relationship with God. And I know what you're thinking. Well, that sucks. I know. That's what you're thinking. You're thinking, that's terrible. Well, what does that say about what you actually think about God? You think God hasn't got your back. You think God doesn't have something better for you. You think God can't be in it, and you're going to figure it out on your own. Well, why don't you give him your unhappiness? And why don't you give him your bitterness? And why don't you give him your frustration? And why don't you just decide, okay, God, I'm going to give you all this stuff. And you know what happens if you really go on that journey for a few months or a year or 2 years or 5 years or whatever it is? You will move into that relationship, if it comes along, when it comes along, so much healthier. And you will have something to bring. Because if you're that unhappy where you are right now, you know what's going to happen when you find somebody? You're going to take. And it's going to destroy the relationship. And it's going to destroy you. So you just surrender it to Christ and say, I hate where I'm at, but I'm here. And I'm going to put that time and energy not into another person. I'm going to put it into you. And you will get healed. And spiritually, what if you just declared it a new day spiritually? And for some of you, that means coming to Christ for the first time. For some of you, that means renewing your commitment to Christ. See, because here's what's true. Jesus' approach to sex isn't just trying to save you from something bad. He's trying to introduce you to something better. So, will you surrender your sexuality? Will you give up your porn habit? Will you stop looking at people you're not with and you're not supposed to be with? Will you stop obsessing over the fact that you're not where you hoped you'd be in life? Will you just surrender it? Will you give that to Jesus? Will you give it to God? Because he can handle it. And you know what he'll do with it? Better. 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 Let's pray. Father, this is so challenging, this teaching. But you are going to do better with my marriage, with our sex lives than we ever would. And your way is better. And in you is life. There's a narrow way. Only a few people ever find it. So today, Lord, help us to find it. Help us to find it in our marriages. Help us to find it in our non-marriages. Help us to find it in our singleness, in being separated, in being divorced. May this be day one. Day one. As it was in the beginning. God, you can fulfill the longings that we have. And so today I pray for everyone who's ready to do it. We just surrender to you our sexuality, our sex life, our broken marriage, our sad situation, our heartbreak, our despair. In Jesus' name, amen.